Board Member Dominguez, we are streaming.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Good Monday afternoon to all who are in attendance and participants. Thank you for joining us. And I wanted to thank those constituents and guests who are returning for your continued engagement and commitment to public schools. I'm promising to work hard to keep this meeting under an hour, an hour max. And so I ask for the cooperation of fellow committee members, but I certainly don't want to hamper discussion. But just a reminder that we did get materials ahead of time. Everyone had a chance to ask questions. And yeah, I'm looking forward to some good discussion. So I would like to call this meeting to order. Dr. Albright, may I please have a roll call?
Janelle Astorga.
Here.
Ronaldo Tomorito.
Here.
Courtney Jackson.
Here.
Josefina Dominguez.
Here. Our first item for consideration and action is to consider adoption of the November 4th, 2024 Policy Committee meeting agenda. May I have a motion and a second, please?
I move to adopt the November 4th, 2024 Policy Committee meeting agenda. I will second.
Dr. Albright, roll call, please.
Janelle Astorga.
Yes.
Ronaldo Tomorito.
Yes.
Courtney Jackson.
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes. Our next item for consideration and action is approval of the minutes from the Policy Committee meeting on September 9th, 2024. May I have a motion and a second, please?
I move to approve the minutes from the Policy Committee meeting on September 9th.
I second. Ronaldo Tomorito.
Dr. Albright, a roll vote, please.
Janelle Astorga.
Yes.
Ronaldo Tomorito.
Yes.
Courtney Jackson.
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes. Our next item for consideration and action is approval of amendments to sections 4I, 4J, and 4K of the APS Board of Education Governance Manual. May I have a motion and a second, please?
I move to approve the amendments to sections 4I, 4J, and 4K of the APS Board of Education Governance Manual.
And I will second Ronaldo Tomorito.
And may we have a roll
Actually,
call
you need
vote.
to call for, no, now you need to call for
Discussion.
discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because you have a motion and a second, so you have a motion on the floor, and now you need to have discussion.
So is there discussion on the item? Yes.
We have some discussion.
Board Member Jackson.
So my first question is in regards to the additional amendment that was inserted into the committee minutes for 4I1H, where the language was changed
Yes.
from what was the proposed language from the first reading. I'm wondering why it was changed, why the committee isn't going to discuss the change of the language, but also the fact that there's potentially unintended consequences that come up with this, where the language was changed by the chair's discretion to be an additional committee member may choose to participate on a rotating basis. And so to me, when I read that, it doesn't really have any guardrails or parameters around it. What if all four of us want to show up to agenda meetings? what, I mean, where are the guidelines around any additional committee member may choose to participate on a rotating basis?
So the intent, the original intent that we discussed during the last committee meeting was around transparency. I don't think it's a good idea to have one person, the chair of any committee, meeting with the superintendent alone. I think it's wise to have another member present, but it also serves for onboarding and leadership capacity building. It keeps people in the loop. If you can see how conversations happen with leadership, it makes it easier for board members to step into those roles. So I want to clarify that the original, when I saw the written language after our meeting, the chair may have an additional committee member present. That sentence did not capture the essence of encouraging participation because it puts all the power in one person, the chair. The chair may decide that additional participation. I think it's important to allow members to make it clear that an additional committee member may choose to participate as long as it's on a rotating basis, thereby giving other committee members an opportunity to see how committee agendas are set. And so that's the intent behind, I think that was the intent of the conversation, of how I framed the conversation at the last meeting. And so I asked our policy analysts to have the language reflect intent. I don't think you can only have one additional person in that committee or in that agenda setting meeting. I think that's what was made clear at the last committee discussion. But what wasn't clear was that the decision should not rest in one person's the chair's decision. It should not block access. And there's a potential for that.
Well, I guess I think you're right, there are unintended consequences. So my question is let's say for sake of argument that both Ronalda and I decide that we want to show up to the next committee meeting. I mean, who makes those decisions? You know, it's like, who gets to decide whether it's me or it's Ronalda? And then if we both decide we want to come, like, do you see, like, it's creating unintended consequences of who gets to choose to participate?
Fair question. Does anyone else want to, Board Member Tomorito or Board Member Astorga? Do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I can weigh in. This is Board Member Astorga. I see both points of view. So I do see the intent that we wanted to come through with that first change, which I do agree with. And I do like the sentiment of wanting to learn and this being like a learning space for each committee member. And I also do see Board Member Jackson's worry when it comes to what does happen if multiple board members want, or board committee members want to attend those meetings. So I'm trying to word it in my head as well. I don't know if Member Tomorito has anything she wants to jump in.
Right now where it currently sits, and I know that you know, like for instance, like right now we have how many board members attending the committee meeting, and then And then other places we have our designated two. So it works based on whatever the familiarity for those board members to want to participate. I think even with audit, there's two of us, that's Heather and I. And sometimes, you know, Courtney comes into, and but there is that question of, because there's only 7 of us and how we run this whole thing, but
How would we
I'm just-
choose? How would we choose? It like let's go back to board member Jackson's example for you. If you and she want to join me for a committee or an agenda setting meeting with the superintendent, how would you two resolve that? I mean, is it?
I guess that's my question, like why if this is being inserted for a reason that this committee thinks is important, then shouldn't it also have guidelines as to how that situation is resolved?
We can do
Like
that.
why do Ronaldo and I have to rock, paper, scissors as to who gets to go instead of like if we're creating a document that's our guidance document, then shouldn't it have guidance in it? I
Okay,
guess
so
and kind of my overall question of this too is, which is going to become a recurring theme, is this is part of the governance manual, right? This is in our governance manual. And on November 20th, we are going to be having a meeting where we're going to be discussing the implementation calendar, the implementation outlook that we're going to have. And in that, we're going to be conducting an ad hoc, or an ad hoc committee is going to be established to review the entire governance manual. So an overall theme that you're going to pick up on tonight is, I guess I don't understand why we're doing such small changes when the whole governance manual is about to be reviewed by an ad hoc committee.
I guess my question is, who decided that?
We all had an opportunity to review the implementation calendar. We've all had conversations with our coaches. And that's going to be discussed on November 20th.
Correct. And that will be
Right.
discussed.
Right. So if we're about to have an entire governance manual review, I'm just uncomfortable with us making all of these changes when we're just about to go through the process for a second time. It just seems inefficient.
Well, this is Board Member Tomorito. Well, the other thing, Courtney, you have to realize is that one, we got to adopt that timeline and that particular piece, but there's also some of us who disagree with it. And I don't want to also state that we are going to do that in the future if there's disagreement with that whole timeline. I think that's another thing that once we discuss that, then we can feel appropriately that we do need to take action based on what we agree with. But I think right now, once that comes under our direction of voting on it, that will then, accrue what we need to do. But I think right now, the question is, there's some of us who disagree with that.
So it seems like stuff like this needs to go to the full board.
Oh, yeah, it does. But
Yeah.
I'm just saying, but I'm
So-
also saying, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disrupt.
No, it's okay. You go ahead.
No, but I'm just stating that I know that there's precedents for certain things and that when I really think too, this is where we have to really decide, one, is this up to policy committee or is it up to board? And you're saying it's up to board. But I also feel, I don't know, based on the direction of how we want to proceed in this, it's possible, but it's also one of the questions of, If we choose to go that route, or if we choose to do this within the policy committee is another question.
Well, I think even if it is within the policy committee, all that committees can do is make recommendations to the full board.
Yeah,
So even if, you know, that we're 100% going to have disagreements about all of these changes, amendments that have been put forth for tonight, all we can do is either recommend or not recommend the changes. It is going to have to go to the full board, and the full board is going to have to decide. So I will make my statements and reflect on the fact that, you know, we're ultimately trying to create a culture of changing adult behaviors, and it seems like a lot of these changes are being made for the benefit of the adults and is taking time away from focusing on what we really need to be focusing on, which is students. And the fact that, you know, 25 hours has been spent just on these small changes, it's just mind-boggling that so much of our staff time is being taken up to nitpick policies that are adult focused and not student centered. So
Courtney, I'm only saying this because I think that, one, I brought up the question many times on the dais about adult behaviors and how do we evaluate that, and nobody has even begun to cite how we'll do that. And I think right now what we're seeing at play here is numerous adult behaviors, not only specifically on the board, and I'm going to be truthful with that. And how do you quantify and change that direction so all of us have an equal part and an equal voice sitting on this board? Because I do feel at times that is not the focus here, and we've lost sight of that. So I think adult behaviors, yes, are in question. And I think right now we need to figure out how we evaluate it and look at that. Thank you.
So,
if I may,
go ahead,
I
Board
just want
Member
to bring us
Estrella.
back to the question about the amendment to, or the second read. And I still feel like both reasonings, I guess, make sense to me. And I do think if we do have like some parameter on there about having one additional committee member to choose to participate on a rotating basis, because I do think choose to participate is important to keep in there, because I do understand what you're saying about chair having that decision. But I also do think that it comes with the role. If you choose to become chair, you have to make those decisions, right? And that's where it gets muddy, where Member Jackson is talking about like how do we decide those things? So in this being a guide, we can say, right, the chair may create some type of rotating basis for each participant or something like that. But I do understand that there has to be some type of perimeters, because we can't have the same participant wanting to or choosing to attend a meeting every single time. But yeah, I just wanted to bring us back because I know Board Member Dominguez, you wanted to stay on time.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. And so I was, you know, I'm trying to understand the problem here. So thank you. I mean, we can add on a rotating basis, dictated by alphabetical order. I mean, it's that simple, I think.
I think my point of this is that these additions are creating unintended consequences when that haven't been clearly thought through. So if it seems like for the committee to leave it as this, and then this can go to the full board and the discussion can be had there, that's fine. I'm pointing out that these changes, I'm not sure that they've been thought through all the way. And then I have another question, but if we want to move to the next one.
So, you know, we're putting together a handbook, an addendum, guidelines. And so we can certainly note how this will happen in that addendum, in those, the addendum on processes. Does that sound like a reasonable,
I mean, if it's gonna happen,
it's already started.
fantastic.
Okay, so may we move on?
No, I had another question.
Okay,
Okay, and this also is to the request for the background, for the information to be shifted into the background. I did ask the question as why that language that had already been removed from the we discussed that language last time and it was removed. And so it seems as though it has made its way back into the governance manual, even though it has already been removed. And the question when it came back, is the answer was that you as the chair had reinserted it. So the points that I feel compelled to make about that is, first of all, I think it's a little disrespectful that after this committee has decided that that language needed to be removed, that it got placed back in. Again, we will be discussing an implementation calendar on November 20th, in which issues like that about when the governance manual needs to be reviewed, how often it needs to be reviewed, all of that is going to be or can be discussed through the ad hoc committee that is doing the job of reviewing the governance manual. I also think that I will go on record. I hate this statement. I think it has the potential for abuse. I think it has the huge potential for ineffective governance. I think it creates a path in which stability of our governance manual is reduced, because our governance manual is meant to be our solid, our roadmap, right? Like the solid roadmap that we rely on. And if it can just be changed at a whim, or if we're going to be spending our time wordsmithing policies or making little, changes here and there just because there has to be continuous review and revision. It's just starting us on a path away from effective governance and down a path where we are completely redirecting ourselves away from focusing on the student outcomes. So for the record, I would like that language removed because it was removed the first time and it has strangely made its way back in.
so I'd like to answer to that. First of all, I think, yes, there's going to be a review of the manual, but we are still a committee and we still have the right to and the obligation to do the work of policy committee. And I want to remind our viewers that we are a work in progress. This governance manual is still new. And it, as as one of our board members pointed out, the student outcomes focused governance is a framework. It doesn't have to be a Bible. And so we are a work in progress, an emerging example. And so the reason I brought this back is because it did come up in conversation with a couple of board members. And so I felt it necessary to bring it back here to the committee to revisit the language. I think it's important to reiterate that, and quite frankly, I believe the policies, even administrative, educational policies and administrative policies are a living document. We're always reviewing and adjusting. And because we are the example, supposedly nationwide, I think this is a good example to set. That our manual will accommodate the board's needs and the implementation of student outcomes focused governance. And I will also reiterate that our mantra on the board is student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change. And this governance manual helps us as adults. It stands as a statement of values, and we value transparency, we value collaboration, we value continuous improvement, and that's what a living document represents. And so I will leave it up to the other. I'd like to hear from Board Member Tom Morito briefly and Board Member Astorga.
Can I just ask Member Jackson to remind me why we kept that out the first time, if you remember? Because I feel like there was something, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I have my notes from last time. Part of the reason that it was removed was because, okay, well, part of it was because well, let me go back. Part of it is because policy review is already stated in 4J. How we go about our policy renewal, our policy amendments, our policy revision, it's already outlined in 4J. So, which is the board policy scope and development section. So having that in, first of all, having the language in there was redundant. It's also listed in 4D, where it talks about how the board will comply with all federal statutes. The board discusses the board's primary powers of policy. So the main reason that it was removed was because it was fluff when we actually had, articles that were addressing policy development. Trying to read my little chicken scratch.
That's fine. I just remember that there was, a specific reason that I think it was somewhere else or something. So yeah, I do think because the last policy committee meeting, we spent a lot of time discussing what should and should not be on there. I do agree that, I mean, if it's already in 4J about how we amend policy, I think we could leave it out. I will also say that during my one-on-one with our coach and the implementation policy, I did have some questions about my role when it comes to governing, because I feel like I always say this, there's just a misinterpretation of how governance manual is read. So I think it's important that we have these discussions. But I also want to make sure that we are writing this document in a way that makes sense and is also, I don't know, we don't leave anything out, right? So I understand the need to make sure that we say it is a living policy document, but if there's already a section, then I don't think we need to have that in the background. And we could add something like that to 4J where it talks about those amendments. But yeah, I will pass it to Member Tomorito. That's kind of my opinion on it.
May I add something, Board Member Tom Morito, before you make your comments? So here's another piece of my thinking. When I returned from the National Indian Education Association conference, what became very, very clear to me there was that we had failed to consult properly with our tribal leaders on, and they had the superintendent of the Navajo Nation articulated his displeasure with how we had worded our educational policy. Two of them in particular, he noted that we had referenced the Martinez-Yazzie lawsuit, and he was not happy with, nor was the president of the Navajo Nation, with the wording on those two references of the targeted populations of the Martinez-Yazzie, and he had some suggestions. But it reminded me as to how new we are at this. And it also reminded me that in a historical context, the ever-emerging needs of tribal leaders who are articulating their desire and their respectful demand to be at the table came through loud and clear. It's evolving, those conversations around tribal consultation. And so I guess I felt compelled to come back to this notion of a living document and reiterating that in our historical continuum in the state and in Albuquerque, it's a good reminder. Yes, we're going to revise. I think there's language in 4J that is open to interpretation, but I wanted to see a more solid expression about this governance manual being a work in progress, being open to collaboration, to do justice to sovereign nation relationships. And so I forgot to mention all that backdrop, which is what I came back with in my head, and trying to honor what I had learned at the National Indian Education Association conference. And so I'll stop, and Board Member Tom Morito.
Well, and as being one of the individuals here who sees many contradictions written in these policies and why and how, and often I have questioned but never gotten answers. I understand the reiteration of certain policies and how they're brought up in certain other places, but I also know that as a new and incoming board member, sometimes this can be confusing when other board members know where these places are while the rest of us are trying to figure out, okay, this is where it is, this is where it's not is. And it can become confusing, but also reiterated, but then reiterated in a different form. And so it makes us to question sometimes, where do we sit and how do we sit on these certain areas of concern? But I think right now, I understand in the future, we are gonna, whether it depends on when we take on that timeline and how we're gonna do it is the question of whether or not how we want to proceed forward. But I also understand that we got to give honor due to the policy committee and what it's doing now. And I understand where Josefina Dominguez, the chair, is coming from too. and her understanding of many other aspects that we're seeing going on at this moment, and the questioning of how we create this voice within equity is what we're really looking at here, to make sure it's fair and right and just for all of us to have the voice and what we need, so that this policy is not taken out of context. But I understand everybody's need, and I understand the backdrop of everything. But I also feel that what we have to do as a policy committee is to do what we need to now. And as we change that down the road, then it is changed. But I also think that we have to honor this process and do what we need to. I don't know if that's an answer.
But do you feel strongly any particular way whether we keep this language or not? Do
I
you
think it needs to
it's
be removed.
so does it suffice to say in 4J, the board may develop, review, and revise any governance policy established by the board through a majority vote of members? Is that enough? And I guess I'm asking all of you.
I have something to say, but I have a lot to say, so. So I'll wait if somebody else wants to say something before I go.
Yeah, I was waiting for Board Member Tomorito, but I will say that from the prior discussion, I think it's important in that where you just stated to say something about the governance manual and amending it in some way, because I think that was part of the biggest concerns last time was we do need to review this governance manual, right? And that's not clear. It's not named. The policies are, it just says policies on there, and governance manual is not actually named. So I do think that that's important to point out. But again, like I stated before, we don't need to have it in the background if we have a section that talks about amendments. But that would just be my plug. If we do add in a name, the governance manual review would look like this. I think that would be helpful for me.
And where do you see that? Do you put it in 4J, the second sentence, or right after the second sentence? So it reads 4J, the first sentence says, the board will create and adopt educational or governance policies for Albuquerque Public Schools in accordance with applicable state law and regulation. Second sentence, the board may develop, review, and revise any governance policy established by the board through a majority vote of members. I mean, yeah,
and I think right after that we can add what you have here is we understand the governance manual requires continuous review and revision to accommodate the board's needs and implementation of student outcomes focused governance.
okay.
So I'm going to respectfully disagree that actually doesn't need to be added, because we're already, if you leave the language the way it is, it may develop, review, and revise any governance policy established by the board through a majority vote of members. That gives the action that you guys are requesting. Plus, in the background section, it does say it says that the board will focus on and evaluate the most important student outcome issues while delegating administrative and management authority to the superintendent. So we're already saying that we're going to do that. I
think the big point for me is that when we talk about the governance manual, that's really where we're pointing how our board governs everything, right? And it's not, this is like the one point where we're not truly talking about student outcomes focused governance. We're talking about our own outcomes as a board, at least like for this piece, right, is like our governance manual. This is our guide for everything. So for me, needing to review our governance as a board and how we are making sure it's connected to student outcomes is super important. So even with just implement this calendar and the implementation, right? That's one of the things that I brought up is reviewing the governance manual. We're gonna change it if all of a sudden we see that one part of our governance manual isn't actually providing success to student outcomes because we need to change the way we're governing. So I think that's why I really want to name it as like this manual is a guide for us, and we need to review it and revise it in order to make sure that we're actually doing our job correctly. And I hope that I'm explaining that the way I like it's happening in my head.
I mean, this is, so this is what I've tried. We've had these discussions. I've heard these ideas before. I think I heard them on the dais in September when we were asking for a retreat and why, the whys. And prior. And so I'm, as policy chair, I'm trying to do my best to respond to the needs that I hear, especially from new members. I think those of us who have been part of this, the first draft, and I do consider this a first iteration of, and that's not to dismiss all the hard work and, you know, the initial creation, but it's new. And so we have, both Member Jackson and I were immersed in this for a year, it felt like. And so I think hearing from new members is critical. And so I've tried to capture your sentiments exactly, Board Member Astorga. And I agree, we could end it at requiring continuous amend the suggested amendment that has reappeared after continuous review and revision. And again, all this, I don't want to belabor this because this is going to go before the entire board again for discussion. But I think it's important to have these thoughts discussed on the dais. And so I'm going to suggest that I'm going to take your suggestion, Board Member Astorga, and let's see, I need the help of our policy analyst, who I'm hoping is dictating this. The board recognizes the governance manual as a living policy document requiring continuous review and revision. And that would appear after the second sentence under the heading 4J, Board Policy Scope and Development. I think that is correct. Do you concur, policy analyst Jessica Martinez?
Hi, Madam Chair. So what you are proposing then is starting, because we're looking at two different sections here, starting with the background piece. The 2022 Board of Education shifted its governance priorities and focus to student outcomes. We are striking the board recognizes the governance manual as a living policy document subject to continuous review and revision from this section and moving it to 4J after the board may develop, review, and revise any governance policy established by the board through a majority vote of the members. The board recognizes that the governance manual is a living policy document requiring continuous review and revision. Is that what was proposed?
I don't think it's the living policy document part. I think it's just, well, Board Member Astorga, I'm taking words out of your mouth, but I think all she inserted there was the governance manual will
requiring. let me-
is subject to continuous review and revision.
The board recognizes the governance manual. No,
No,
Yeah, so it was just that second part that I had suggested.
she said
We're talking about revisions.
correct. Requiring continuous review and revision. So, the board recognizes the governance manual requires. Is that
Require
correct?
continuous review and revision to accommodate the board's needs and implementation of student outcomes focused governance. So the rest is the same. Just so it continues that same language before.
We're striking as a living policy document and requires continuous review and revision to accommodate the board's needs and the implementation of student outcomes focused governance.
Correct, because that implies that it's a living document. So I think it's sufficient.
Okay. Okay.
We have no addition on 4J, Madam Chair. Is that correct?
Pardon me?
There is no addition from the new paragraph on 4J, correct?
So I'll let Member Astorga clarify where she sees this fitting in.
So that what that sentence that we just clarified would be added to that second sentence on 4J. And I don't have it in front of me, but
It would come after it would become the third sentence. 1, 2.
So to clarify,
So we're taking it out of the background.
yes, and moving it to become the third sentence at the beginning, I'm sorry, at the end of 4J. So it will read, starting with the second sentence, the board may develop, review, and revise any governance policy established by the board through majority vote. The board may also suspend, revoke, or revise any policy established that is not specifically prescribed by federal and state statute through a majority vote of the members. The board recognizes the governance manual requires continuous review and revision to accommodate the board's needs, and so on.
yes.
Okay. Got it.
Again, my purpose was to accommodate new board members' observations and concerns. And so, yeah. I'd like to move on if that's.
I understand that, but
we're at month 11. So we need to start taking responsibility for learning what's in our documents.
Okay. And so it's been, I think there's room for grace, because we have also not done a good job of perfecting the onboarding process. And it requires time to coalesce the 4 previous members with 3 new members who are trying to make their way as best as possible. And I might add, the policy committee met with some difficulties getting meetings together. And so I'll just leave it at that. And I
just
think
wanted
there's
to
room for
respond
grace.
to that too, if I may, because as a new board member, I've been doing the work, right? Reading the governance manual, trying to learn my role and all of these things. And I think what's hard and confusing specifically about the governance manual, which I also shared with our coach during the implementation calendar meeting, is that I can read it a certain way, but once I try to govern as a board member, I couldn't get met with some obstacles and barriers, right? Because I'm interpreting the governance manual a certain way. And same if I go to you, Board Member Jackson, you can tell me that the governance manual says something completely different than Board Member Dominguez does. So that was one of the biggest reasons why I did want a retreat, to really talk about the governance manual itself and its interpretation. And I think that's the hardest part for me as a new board member, and why I do agree with revising it, or not even revising it, right? Just looking at it and see how we're interpreting it, because I'm trying to do the best that I can as a new board member. And even when I think that sometimes I get it, it seems like I don't, because I have board members seeing it different ways. So that's why I see this as like a guide for us as our adult behaviors and governing as board members, but it's not clear. And I think it's not that the wording isn't clear. I really do feel like it's two different interpretations, and that's what's hard. So even in these conversations, as we're talking, like I said before, there are things where I do agree with you, Board Member Jackson, and then I do agree with you, Board Member Dominguez, because this is the first time where I'm hearing it from different perspectives. So I appreciate this setting, and I think that's what we've been needing the whole time. But yeah, it's frustrating because it is month 11 and I'm still having the same questions and asking these same questions here in the policy committee meetings and on the dais of, well, what is my role? How do I do my role effectively? And I don't get clear answers. Or when I do, it's different from different board members. So I'm developing like my own persona as a board member, but it would be great if we're all united in one delivery. And I know that that's hard, but I think that's the purpose of these meetings, I think, is having that discussion. So I think it's important that we're all here and being genuine with our opinions, which I appreciate.
Thank you. I do appreciate hearing from new board members, because your experience matters. It's a, for me, it's a, okay, it's time to redo the lesson plan, revisit. For me as a teacher, it makes a whole lot of sense, because when your students aren't getting it, you need to stop and reconfigure. So, and you're right, that's what we're trying to do here.
And just to quickly add that it's not SOFG. Like there's no problem with that framework
Right.
model. It really is just learning how to be the most effective like elected official in this new way that we're governing, coming from someone who has never been in this position before. So it really does come from, okay, how do I learn this in a way where I'm going to do my job effectively, and we could all be united in that same way of delivery.
Which is very much the point that I'm trying to make, and I realize that I'm coming across harshly. But that's very much the point I'm trying to make, is this document has to help us effectively govern, whether it's SOFG or some other sort of governance structure. We have to continually, we have to be focusing on what this document says, so that we're effectively governing, so that we're not wasting our time discussing sentence structure. We're focusing on, can our kids read? So that's my point of all of this. When I point things out like, well, that language is already over here. Well, that language is already over there. It is because I've studied this document. It is because I've read this document, but it's also because our job is to be effective governors of the board. And so to do that, we have to have a document that aids us in that role. So that's my.
And you know, and I want to also agree with Board Member Astorga. It is one thing to give us the documents and to give us the books and to give us all those things, but when we don't understand, when in the midst of conversations, what are you addressing? Where are you addressing it until you start reading everything? But then sometimes within the document, it doesn't refer to specific other documents or policies. So it becomes very clouded in how you perceive and need to take action on something. And I'm only saying that because as an advocate in special education, you need to know where those things are written and how they're written and why they're written that way. But when it gets confusing, then you lose sight of your role and how to advocate, and also your role as a board member. That becomes clouded. And so then but you hear everybody talk to you about staying in your lane, but you don't even know what lane that is. But then all of a sudden, and I'm only trying to be truthful, is you get reprimanded or you get told that you went in the wrong way. And then you're trying to just guide yourself in trying to figure out, okay, let me take a step back. But because we don't know sometimes when we read these documents, that also creates a hindrance of not having a voice. That also creates a place where, am I an equal board member on this? Isn't it? And if I don't feel that, is it because I don't know the documents, or are the documents confusing? And so it is very questionable, and I'd have to agree with board member Astorga. And as a new and incoming board member, it is trying to figure out where is our place, what is our role. But when it's clouded and not given to you directly, and there's these other ideas and questions of what is right and what isn't, yeah, you have a tendency not to say anything, and you just take a backspace and you try to figure it out and hope we do. And that's all I'm going to say on this, but it has been one too. And yes, it took us this long, but that's also to say that it's that confusing. And to finally figure out SOFGs over here, manuals over here, policies over here, and not having the onboarding or not having these retreat and questions within a retreat, it becomes really hard. It becomes hard when you're guided by nothing really to figure this whole thing out. But anyway, that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
So I'm just gonna say that at the end of the day, honest inquiry into the governance manual to effectively serve our constituents, and our board members, our new board members and potential board members out in the audience, should be welcomed and encouraged. And I'm trying to create a space for that. But I'm also trying to be mindful of time, and our time is getting away from us. And so I'd like to bring this item 4 to a conclusion, if that's okay. And so I think there's still room for discussion, because this is a recommendation coming out of this committee to the board at large. And so there's going to be more discussion about what we decide here. So with that, I'd like to ask for a motion and a second so that we can get on to the next item on our agenda.
So you have a motion and a second. What you actually need is now a motion to amend, because there were amendments to the original motion.
Okay. May I have a motion to amend? We're moving the recommended amendment out of the background information. Let me get and over to 4J, board policy scope and development.
So tell me if this is correct, but can I say I move to approve the amendments to sections 4I, 4J, and 4K of the APS Board of Education Governance Manual?
All you need to say is that you move to amend the original motion, blah, 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 blah.
Okay, I move to amend the original motion of approval of amendments to section 4I, 4J, and 4K of the APS Education Governance Manual.
And I second Board Member Tomorito.
Okay, Dr. Albright, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Janella Storga,
Yes.
Ronaldo Tomorito,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
No.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes. Moving on to item number 5. Our next item for consideration is policy review update and next steps. And our presenters are board members Courtney Jackson and Heather and board member Heather Benavides.
Today, we're going to get in under the wire for board member Benavides. So do you want me to do a quick introduction?
Sure, if you'd like, and good
Okay.
evening, everyone.
So board member Benavides and I sat on the policy policy diet ad hoc committee. We were tasked with reviewing the remainder of the policies that had already been reviewed one time last summer with board president Gonzalez and former board member Barb Peterson. So any that were not very clearly administrative or very clearly board were then put before board member Benavides and myself. We reviewed them 2 separate times so that we could make our recommendations. And the one theme that we had as we were reviewing these documents was we always had in the back of our head, where does the expertise lie? So if the expertise very clearly laid with the superintendent, we felt very confident placing those policies into the, I've got to remember, hold on, into the archive section. If we felt that they were very clearly within the expertise of the board, that we kept them. And then there are some that we feel that we need to keep, but they just need a slight modification. So board member Benavides, do you have anything to add?
Not really, that was a very comprehensive summary, but it was kind of a tough job, especially for one of the newer board members who is still learning. And even after 11 months, you know, there are things that are very puzzling to me, but everybody's grace and patience have been wonderful. So I appreciate that. But it was a lot of time and effort on our part, and we met a few times, and I hope that the board agrees with what we have decided or what we concluded with each of the policies that we reviewed.
And I want to say I really appreciate the effort on both your parts, because I know it takes time and a lot of discussion and for you, board member Benavides, you have a full-time job on top of all that we ask of board members. So thank you to both. And I know you have a full-time job outside the house, and board member Jackson and women who we rely on to take care of our children at home, we have a full-time job at home. So thank you to both. Are there any questions? And so just briefly remind me how you foresee next steps.
I think Ms. Martinez can help us with this, but my understanding is that this is right now just a discussion item, and that this recommendation will go to the full board. Is that correct, Ms. Martinez?
Madam Chair, Member Jackson, yeah, that's correct. From here, the next step can be that for now, you all are just sharing your recommendations and your findings. And next step will be to take the if this committee agrees to take the archive policies to consent calendar in November, that's an option for you. Any further review can happen at a later time.
That's good to know.
Will the keeps go to consent as, I guess if we're keeping them, they don't need to be moved.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
correct. There'll be no
So
action.
just the
on those.
archives.
It's just the modified?
The modifies will move forward in next steps outside of this particular meeting for their review, potential revision, whatever the committee or ad hoc or whoever's going to do that work.
I have, do I make a recommendation now for the KB or do I wait until the full board?
Member Tomarito, I think that we'll wait till the actual discussion starts.
Okay, I'll do it then. Thank you.
The actual discussion
No.
Full board.
now, or
No, the actual discussion for each individual policy review. Whoever's looking at those is going to take them a piece at a time, bring them to a policy meeting and propose their revisions, which, may include the discussion regarding KB1 or not, and the discussion will ensue at that time.
so I guess that's my question in terms of next steps. We, as a policy committee, we are going to recommend that the policies in the column that says keep and the policies under archive will move forward to the full board on a consent calendar. And so in this committee, as these are policies that need reviewing, the ones under modify, since these are policies that need to be reviewed, do we as a committee need to make a decision about how we handle these next? To me, it makes sense since we are the policy committee.
I think I'll have to defer to Dr. Blakey on this one. Dr. Blakey, if you have, a process that may happen in your discussion with the chair, that would not be my purview to tell you how to distribute the work.
I guess I need a little bit of background because I haven't had since July 1st a review of these policies. What has been the process in the past?
We've used a lot of different steps, to be honest with you. This one, this set, and luckily there's only 6, but this set has undergone every consideration between give one to each person and let them make their own proposal, assign an ad hoc, have the committee, the policy committee begin the work of review. There's several different steps that are available to the committee at this time.
So are you saying that in last year when they did this, they did it different each time?
They did it different in the sense that we were just going by scores in terms of archive. And so we'd archive a batch, right? The ones that were capped or modified were really not in a batch like this. They were kind of on a case-by-case basis and done by the policy committee. So yeah, if we stayed with the way that it's been and treat these policies the way that we've treated others, then they can go to the policy committee and go one by one for a discussion like you've had tonight and do your, make your revisions for proposal to the board that way.
And you're talking about the modified section,
Correct.
just the ones in the middle column.
Correct.
Which are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Correct. There's no action needed on the keeps because those we are keeping up to do anything archives can go on consent. The only thing we need to figure out now is what to do with how to treat the modified policies.
And so I'm going to go back to the ad hoc committee members. I know you have put in extensive time on this. Would you want to continue with the six, with the work of continuing the work to figure out what to do with those six? Or would you rather pass it off to share the wealth?
So I think that the way the ad hoc committee works is that when we concluded our review of the diet and got to this section, that the policy diet ad hoc committee has already been disbanded because we did our work. So I will not speak for board member Benavides. I'm happy to continue with the modification because she and I have, sorry, I'm not trying to speak for you.
No, you're fine.
I'm happy to continue with the work because I've already done the work, but because it's an ad hoc committee, that's not a decision for this policy committee. That's a decision for the board president who appoints the ad hoc committees.
Yes, and thank you. I recognize that the ad hoc committee has completed its work. And so now this committee is faced with a decision. So we can either, and this is another learning opportunity to talk about what the policy diet was and how we got to this point. And we can certainly use the wealth of information that both board member Benavides and Jackson bring to the learning process, see it as an onboarding that was overlooked perhaps. And then so this committee can decide what to do with each of those six policies.
Board Chair Dominguez, I think, so the question would be if you want a ad hoc committee to look at the six, then that would go to the full
board
to
correct.
be able to have an ad hoc to look to the six and then bring those recommendations back to the policy committee.
If we go the ad hoc committee route.
Correct.
Well, can I make a quick comment? While I think that would probably be useful, in the interest of being efficient with our time, and I don't mean tonight, but our time overall, that's kind of what we already did, Courtney and I. So if you send it to another ad hoc committee, it's just having another review, which is fine if that's what the committee decides to do. But I think a better use of our time would be for us to explain, and probably not right now because I didn't factor in, being here this long, and I apologize for that. It's my fault. But maybe having an open conversation about how we came to the conclusion we did for the keeps or the modifies, and then discussing it, and then putting it on the consent agenda or not, depending on what the policy committee decides. But I think sending what we've decided to another ad hoc committee is just kind of like redundant. And please tell me if you disagree.
That makes
Anybody
sense.
wanna-
Sorry, Heather, I coughed right as you said. Did you say to review it right now?
Well,
I didn't hear what you said.
I would like to, but I don't have the time. I'm sorry. And that's my fault.
Oh.
I didn't realize that this might be a possibility, so I didn't factor in the time. But I think that sending it to another ad hoc committee is redundant because we've already done that work. And so I think
Okay.
having a discussion about each modification is probably a better use of the time, and then the policy committee, but that means scheduling another meeting, and it's,
So we have another meeting, we have another policy committee meeting set for December 4th. Is that, currently, I believe the only thing on that agenda, Ms. Martinez, is, remind me, I think it's only the RFI.
Oh, I know RFI is on the agenda, but it also just occurred to me that there are not documents prepared for us to do a review. Now, we would still have to
No, right.
craft a red line, right? So, gosh, I'm gonna maybe ask Christy Albright if she knows the answer to this, but I do feel like it was for sure. We've got second read on 4-H coming up in December, and
Make a recommendation then, and I think I'm capturing what Member Benavides is saying. She and I already did this. So it would make sense if we have the board president reinstate the policy diet ad hoc committee. She and I can come up with modifications to present when necessary. And then that way, because we've already done it, we've already looked at it, we've already made the recommendations of what modifications we think need to be there. She and I can work on it. We can probably knock it out pretty quickly, and then we can make the recommendations. But we would need the board president to reinstate the policy diet ad hoc committee.
So from this committee, the recommendation would be to put on consent the keep and the archive with a recommendation, to the board president that she reinstate the ad hoc committee of the policy review diet to address the modifications, and you'll do your work, continue the work, and present at perhaps January or February policy committee. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that okay? That sounds.
That's my recommendation. I don't know. The other thing, not to get technical, but Member Benavides isn't technically a policy committee member. So it would have to be through an ad hoc if she and I continued the work together. So like she and I can't work together out of the policy committee, just to be technical. So yes, I think that works for me, but I don't know if that works for Member Benavides.
it does.
Thank you. I think that's a great idea. Very good. Okay. Are we finished? Can we move on to the next item? So our next item for consideration is the first read of proposed amendments to Section 4H of the APS Board of Education Governance Manual. And you all had an opportunity to look at this. Let me get there. In November of 2023, the Albuquerque Public Schools Board of Education adopted its governance manual, which incorporates the board's goals, guardrails, delegation, and governing policies. The committee has now been asked to consider amendments to Section 4H of the manual related to officer roles and responsibilities. This is the first read of the proposed changes. Proposed amendments reviewed by the committee will be posted for 30 days for public comment, then returned to the committee for possible action. And again, I just want to reiterate that the thinking behind these amendments were emerged out of several conversations and a desire to promote transparency, to promote more onboarding and a more efficient use of every meeting possible. It's also an effort to democratize decisions and to ensure that we are doing a good job of including all elected officials or as many as possible perspectives. And so with that, I will open it up to discussion.
I can start this
Um,
round.
Okay, wonderful.
Um, Yes, so I do see some things that I would like to change. Just that on number 3, that's where I have some of my changes. So additionally, at least 2 members of the executive committee will, and then A through F. Some of the concerns that I do have is on letter D and E, just because it says that at least 2 members of the executive committee will meet weekly with the Council of Great City Schools and the superintendent. I really don't think that that's realistic because it's hard for executive committee to have all 3 members at the meetings sometimes. So having weekly meetings is going to be kind of unrealistic, especially because, as you mentioned before, most of us have full-time jobs. So I'm thinking that I don't know how Board Member Tomorito feels because I know she's also on an executive committee, but just from my standpoint, I feel like that's going to be very difficult to achieve. So that was one of the things that I wanted to discuss. And then it's kind of like the same issue that I had with 3B, with at least 2 members of the executive committee. I feel like that's going to be hard to do as well. So saying that at least one other member of the executive committee would work. But just along that same lines of it's not super realistic to have all members at those meetings at all times.
Oh, I see. You're reading that to mean all members?
So for the first one, right, number 3, letters D and E, it just says we need 2 members of the executive committee to meet weekly with the Council of Great City Schools and the superintendent.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's going to be difficult to do because it's going to be, it just is, with meeting weekly is going to be hard. And then that same sentiment that I have about having multiple executive committee members, you can correct me if this was a different interpretation, but where it says number 4B, where the president will coordinate board approved activities and in collaboration with at least the 2 members of the executive committee. We could put with at least 1 other member of the executive committee, just because again, might be hard to always have all of us outside of the executive committee meetings. But I also want to defer to Board Member Tomorito if she feels the same.
I think that I agree it can be cumbersome. I think that one, if we're made aware of and have the opportunity to attend, that would be great. But I think at times we're not aware as executive committee, but if we were informed of when those times were and the door was open for us to come, I think that if we had, the means and the time to do it, I think that would be a better avenue, because our schedules do change. But I think it's also one just to note that if those meetings are occurring and if we have the ability to attend, then we can. At least the door is open. That's all. That's how I see it.
So how can we work toward that end? What's the language that we can I agree. To me, it's about transparency, about participation, more participation.
So can I jump in with a question regarding that?
Sure.
And thankfully, 2 members of the executive committee are here. But, so you can confirm, but my understanding is that you guys currently, you meet monthly, that those meetings are on the calendar, they're established. And that do you guys, is there like a running commentary about what it is that you guys discuss so that the executive committee is like, is there a document or something so that you guys, always know what's going on and what it is that you guys are discussing in those monthly meetings that you guys have?
Yes. Yes, we have monthly meetings and there's always an agenda that we know beforehand, and we're it's like a Google Doc, so we can go and add if we have anything to add, and it's like a running list of things that we need to do or that we want the board to know. So we do have those procedures in place as executive committee. But I do think that some of these things that were changed were really because we don't want just one person to know everything that's happening when we could have an executive committee knowing more. So an example is like the legislative matters, right? It'd be nice to have at least 2 members there talking with the legislature about board initiatives, just because we want that transparency, like Board Member Dominguez was saying. But what I'm more concerned about is that if we put something in there, just to this point that I was making, that says that at least 2 members will do this thing, then it might make it hard for the president to do it herself if not one of us of the executive committee are available. So just to go back to the suggestion that we could do is reinstate the president will, and then I and J, keep those ones, and then we can just add with a possibility for another executive committee member to attend or something along those lines, instead of making it its own specified like rule, I guess. And sorry, Board Member Jackson, if I kind of just like shifted from your answer,
no.
answering your question.
Oh, no. I mean, you'll be surprised. I have a page and a half of comments. So I'm sitting back and waiting until, so I don't jump right in.
Again, how Board Member Tomorito, I liked how you, I mean, your point was to not close the door on the participation of other executive committee members when possible, right?
Well, it's just one of knowing the schedule of when those are going on, and if we had the opportunity to attend, that we could, and that there is an open door for that to happen. I think sometimes even within our monthly executive meetings, there's still some things that do go on that we're not informed of. It's just processes and how things are working on the outside beyond our executive meetings. And sometimes it's one to get the question of how did it come about? What was going on? So many times as an executive committee, it's one to be helpful that we are aware of how processes are going on. And as being 2 new board members and how this all worked was also like, okay, how do we do this? And yes, we have an agenda, but then it's also one to say, is it fully representing what needs to happen, or is it a teaching experience also for us as brand new people that we understand fully what the executive committee does do? But I think that open door would be grateful, and just knowing those scheduled meetings that we're aware of, and we can come at any time if we choose to.
So so if we were to add, the president will attend, and I'm referencing 3I, I think. No, I'm referencing 4I in the amended document. So the president will attend weekly meetings with the Council of Great City Schools or other national entities that unite boards and superintendents on student outcomes focused governance with an open invitation to executive committee members at all times.
This is the open
Yeah.
invitation. Yeah.
And the same thing, the president will meet with the superintendent weekly, comma, with an open invitation to executive committee members at all times. Does that?
Here's the forecast for tomorrow.
Oh, sorry.
Oh. So if we, sorry, can I jump in now?
Yes.
Thank you. So when I look at our evaluating governing policies document that we have, we always have to ask whether or not this policy is enabling the board to effectively conduct its business while aligning what it is saying with what it is doing. I went and looked at, I just pulled 4 random New Mexico School Board Association boards to see how they conducted their board officer role and responsibilities. Not one of them, it was Farmington, Santa Fe, Cuba, and Las Cruces. Not one of them dilute or change the role of the president, the role of the vice president, and the role of the secretary to what this is attempting to do. The way I read this policy, what this policy is attempting to do is to essentially to turn the board chair and the board president into like a group project, to create all of the decisions having to be made by 2 or 3 people. And so when I have to ask myself, how is this aligning with us being effective? What it's actually doing is it's going to slow down our ability to take action. Not our ability, the executive committee, the governing side of this, it's going to substantially slow down the ability to take action. I don't understand how this makes the board work more functional. And I think from an effective governance argument, when we look at what our documents say, we essentially have a chief education officer who is our superintendent, and we have a chief governance officer who is our president. And when we think about our policies that say that we delegate authority to the superintendent, when we do that, we give the superintendent the ability to make any reasonable interpretation that she sees fit when she's implementing policies. Well, that exact same theory applies to the board president. The board president, or the board chair, or however we want to call it, is essentially our lead governance officer. And so we as boards, other boards, I mean, 99.99% of boards have one board president who is in charge of all of the things that we previously had listed. So we give that governance officer the ability to make interpretations sometimes so that she or he can best take action. And I'm really concerned that that interpretation, that effective governance, is going to be slowed down. It could be problematic and potentially chaotic if we're always having to find 2 people to agree with each other and how we're going to move forward on things. Sometimes we just need one person to make the decision. And when I was thinking through this, I was thinking of like Dr. Blakey. we've delegated to Dr. Blakey. She's the one person to make decisions. But what if we told her, you know what, Dr. Blakey, we want you to bring us something about the budget, but we also want the chief financial officer to bring us something. If we delegated that to two separate people, we've now doubled the inefficiencies of how the district works. And I think we have to be mindful of adjusting policies based on personalities instead of, again, focusing on how can we be most effective? How can we govern so that we're spending our time focusing on goals 1 through 4, guardrails 1 through 5? And I think that honestly, all of these amendments, all of them, they don't align with anything that any other NMSBA board is doing. And I think that we have to think of what the unintended consequences are going to be by turning the role of the board president into a group project. What I continually hear is that communication isn't there. Like, Board Member Tomorito, I hear you say that you don't feel like you're getting communicated with. I hear you say that. And I also know that we have been operating since January under a distributive leadership role. I mean, in theory, the board president could be doing all of the facilitation. She could be doing all of the time tracking. I mean, she could be doing everything, but she has distributed all of that. When she makes committee assignments, it's distributed. When we track our time, Secretary Astorga distributes that. The facilitation guide, it's distributed. We've all done the work. She's implemented at a glance, where every week she tells us exactly what she's been doing and what Dr. Blakey has been doing. We have members are given a chance to insert. I've inserted things. I've done that. I mean, we have opportunities to communicate. But we also, and I'm really looking forward to December, we are supposed to have a policy that lines all of these communication issues out, that everybody, that the board as a whole, not just a couple board members, you know, board member or Chair Dominguez, when you say, like, I've heard from a couple people, okay, you heard from a couple people about some things, but the whole board has said, we need communication and there should be a policy on that. And so I'm really looking forward to December when that RFI policy shows up, because I'm really hoping that it addresses these issues that we've been talking about for the last 2 months. So I'll conclude, and then I will state for the record, I don't agree with any of these changes. I think they are creating major inefficiencies within an effective governance structure.
And thank you. You've weighed in on your perspective. I just want to reiterate, however, that there is a difference between Dr. Blakey needing to be the chief person and in charge of, I mean, she's hired by us. But however, we are all elected officials. And so that plays into it. It is that fact. And a strong feeling that I think was articulated in September when we all brought up the need to have a retreat, that we were not feeling well represented, or that our needs were not being met. And so I really appreciate the recommendation to perhaps put, let's see, the president will, instead of striking, and I hope our policy analyst is listening, rather than striking H and, no. Rather than striking I and J from underneath the role of the president, we simply add with an open invitation to executive committee members to attend at all anytime possible. Okay. And again, I think it's important that for the sake of transparency, and it benefits both the board and the superintendent, to have those open conversations. And then it just occurred to me, board member Tom Morito, that we might want to include something or have something prepared under the RFI committee work to address how that gets reported out to the board, more than likely under, the president's report. But I do hear that most of us on the committee are open to a more transparent and broader participatory model for some of these items that are listed here. And I do want to draw our attention to, under the board president will, there is L. And correct me if I'm wrong, policy analyst Ms. Martinez, were we going to make L a separate number, or are we going to begin with act for or on behalf of the board with prior specific authority from a majority of the board?
Madam Chair, I wasn't aware of any change to that to remove it from the section. I mean, that's certainly something that could be proposed tonight, but for right now, I have it included under the list.
Yes. So the only thing, so this is just we discussed it. I remember talking with Johanna King, Chief of Staff, that removing the president will only, and then act, you begin L with act, and then only for or on behalf of the board with prior specific authority. And we tried to get that in before tonight so we wouldn't have this conversation. So, but it escaped that edit. And so I think that's an important, I'm going to reiterate that the board president acts only for or on behalf of the board with prior specific authority from a majority of the board. And that is very intentionally there because unlike Superintendent Blakey, who can pretty much call the shots and does, the board president cannot.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that change that you just said?
Yes, so it's the very last item under the board president will. It's L. Well, it says LH. And so we're striking the president will, and it will start with act only for or on behalf of the board. And this is called parallel construction. It's a grammatical edit because if you notice all the others, they begin with a verb. The president will preside, coordinate, sign, approve, etc. And so this has to start with act.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. And so we are then, just for the sake of clarity, we're moving, let's see, the attend weekly meetings. We're going to move D and E back down under the president will, but we will add language that makes those meetings more open. And I can repeat the language if you need that, Ms. Martinez. Okay, you've got it. Okay, anything else? And I say that cautiously because I think it's time to bring the meeting to a close. We did have a chance to look at all these and weigh in. And so if there are no more comments, I'd like to move on to the final agenda item, and that's number 6, the chair report.
I'm sorry, Member Dominguez.
Yes.
I also would like to allow just the president to appoint board members to serve on external board committees. Just because again, that is a president's role to be able to appoint those board members. I don't see the executive committee needing to do that. And that's not something that we've discussed as an executive committee wanting to do. So I just wanted to put that last one out there as well.
Board Member Tom Morito, do you want to weigh in before I say something?
I mean, I'll weigh in. I think that's appropriate. I think it kind of goes to what we talked about in the policy meeting last time. So that is the president's role. I will also point out that there is an inaccuracy that the board president does not actually attend weekly meetings with the Council of Great City Schools. They occur monthly, and procedures actually say that it's the board president or a designee. So again, these changes are being brought forth, but there isn't any cross consideration of procedures that are already in place. So, I get it. I understand the intent behind it, but I think that when you're bringing forth changes, it's really important to be accurate. I also have a question of why there was an addition of "and coordinate the preparation of monthly agendas." It seems like a redundant sentence when you're already saying that they will participate in agenda preparation. We already have that. Like the executive committee already participates in agenda. Will participate in agenda preparation. So why is there an addition of "and coordinate the preparation of monthly agendas"? It's like those sentences are saying the same. Those parenthetical phrases are saying the same thing.
Or could you refer the number and the
1A. 1A, the executive committee will include the president, vice president, and secretary, and will participate in and coordinate the preparation of monthly agendas for all regular board meetings. That sentence before the addition of "and coordinate the preparation of monthly," it's why is that extra sentence in there when that sentence was already saying that exact same thing?
So that was taken straight from the manual, except just merged into one sentence instead of two. And I'm looking for it. And it's under, I believe it's under the president. H.
It's saying the same. It's saying the same thing. And then in number 2, where it says at least 2 members of the executive committee will meet as needed to coordinate reports to the board and confer about upcoming issues. That could be read 2 ways, right? Like there's already established monthly meetings that the executive committee knows that they need to show up to. And trust me, like when I'm saying this, I'm using executive committee in the broadest sense. I realize I have 2 executive committee people sitting right here. I'm trying to think like, what's next year going to look like? There's already monthly meetings. So is the addition of as needed, is that meant to create more meetings? Is that meant to create less meetings?
Actually, but yeah, potentially both. It just provides some flexibility.
Okay, but do you
so
see how that could be? Like, how is that efficient if it's just on a whim? Like, if you already know that you have a monthly meeting, that's where you're going to have your agendas and that's where you're going to talk about things. Again, like to this point that we keep bringing up, that there are people who work. It's hard. I mean, it's easier to have established times instead of, well, it's just when we need it, and hopefully 2 of us can get together. I'm just really.
So I hear what you're saying, and what I would propose is that, I mean, we got this document ahead of time, and I understand how our time is limited, and perhaps we didn't get questions in and suggested edits. But I
sent
hear
my questions in.
Okay, so this did not appear, but the questions that you're raising now, but they're important, and I think they're important to address. And so I guess there's nothing saying that we can't revisit. Am I correct, Ms. Martinez? Because what I'm trying to do here is wrap this up.
Chair Dominguez, the board can revisit. Yes.
Okay. I mean, the committee. The committee can revisit, correct?
Yes.
Between now and the second read. So I'm interested in getting this right. And so I'm happy to, I encourage you to send in your edits, justifications, and we will work to get it right. And if it requires a third read, then I think what's most important for me is that we get it right. Ultimately, that's the goal. So I don't want to make this a high stakes thing.
Just to reiterate, the executive committee does meet as needed. And we've had other meetings to where she would call upon us to meet. And so it is an as needed piece. So just so that it's just not on the monthly that we meet, but as needed pertaining to whatever the situation is, or if needed to make a decision.
Thank you. So with that, again, I invite comments and observations and suggested edits. And so I'd like to move on to the chair report and wrap this meeting up. Okay. Based on the discussion at tonight's meeting, the board policies recommended for archive by the ad hoc committee made up of members Jackson and Benavides will be added to the December 4th consent agenda to be archived by the board. Staff will add policies that the policy review committee has agreed to keep or modify to the diligent site along with the board's existing policies. Policies recommended for modification will undergo further review. What we are proposing is that to the board and to the president is that she reconvene the ad hoc policy review committee to continue the work on the 6 policies that need modification. And so that would mean that, and we are recommending that members Jackson and Benavides continue that work. Yes, and they will complete their work and come back to the policy committee with their recommendations. The RFI ad hoc committee chaired by Vice President Tom Morito completed its research regarding board requests for information on October 2nd. The proposed draft of this new policy will be presented for a first read at the December 2nd policy meeting. Following the policy committee's discussion and recommendations, the policy will be posted for public comment for 30 days and reviewed for a second read at the January 6th policy meeting. Following tonight's first read of Section 4H of the Governance Manual regarding board officers' roles and responsibilities, the proposed revisions to the policy will be posted for public comment for 30 days and scheduled for a second read at an upcoming meeting. Following the committee's recommendations regarding the roles of board committees and committee chairs during tonight's second reading of Sections 4I, 4J, and 4K of the Governance Manual, the policy will be presented to the board for approval and adoption on consent at the November 20th board meeting. Our next policy committee meeting will be Monday, December 2nd at 5 p.m. virtually. Watch on the APS Board of Education YouTube channel. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.